Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to see how to install and configure the PostgreSQL server in Linux environment. Here we'll choose CentOS 7 as an example. The same instructions will be applicable for CentOS 8 as well. As part of this, we'll see how to install and configure the PostgreSQL server, and then we'll see how to create a database in the server and how to connect to the database in the same machine. And then we'll try to enable the remote connections in the DB server so that the clients from different machines can connect to that server, and finally we will see how to connect to your database in the DB server from a client which is in a different machine. Let us start. This is a Linux server. Here we will use this machine to host the DB server. Let us verify the operating system. So this is CentOS Linux with version 7. In this machine we are going to install the PostgreSQL database server. So for that we need to download it first. Let us search for PostgreSQL download. So we need to click on the link which provides the downloads of PostgreSQL. In this page, let us choose Linux environment. Here let us choose Red Hat. Here we need to select the version, platform and architecture and all. Here I would like to install with version 14. I am choosing version 7. The architecture is x86-64, so I will not change this. Here they have provided the instructions to install the server. So let us copy this script. So let us execute one by one. So the first instruction, basically it adds an RPM file in the yum repositories in CentOS 7. Let us execute this. The installation is successful. Let us go to the yum repositories directory. Here we can see a repository corresponding to PostgreSQL. So let us open this. Here we can see all the entries corresponding to different versions of PostgreSQL. So using this repository file, it contains all the URLs so that we can install the corresponding version in our machine. So before that, let us execute yum update. So let me log in with root user. I have accepted the entries for importing corresponding GPG keys. Yum update is completed. Now let us verify what are the packages available for us in this machine. So for that I am using yum list command. We need to grep for PostgreSQL. So these are all the PostgreSQL packages we can install in this machine. Here we want to install PostgreSQL 14 server package. We can choose this, or we can directly copy this command. So the PostgreSQL server package is installed successfully. Before starting the server, let us initialize the database in the PostgreSQL. The database initialization is completed. Now we can start the PostgreSQL server. So for that we can use the systemctl commands. So in the first command we are enabling it so that the PostgreSQL server can be started automatically when the VM is rebooted. In the next command we can use it for starting the server. So let us execute these two commands. So the server is started. We can verify the status as well. So now the PostgreSQL server is successfully started. Now we have installed the PostgreSQL server in the server VM. So now let us try to create a database in the server, and let us try to connect to the database from the server machine itself. So for this purpose we can execute PSQL commands. So this is the DB server. So by default during initialization it creates a database called Postgres, and also it creates a role called Postgres. In PostgreSQL server we have the concept of roles. These roles will have corresponding privileges. So during initialization, by default, we have a default database Postgres and a role called Postgres that can access this Postgres database. And also it creates a default user called Postgres in the operating system as well. So we can see the user Postgres in the operating system. So this is the user ID and it is part of group Postgres. So if we execute PSQL command in this machine with any user, it expects similar role will exist in the PostgreSQL server. So let us try to execute PSQL command using root user. So now it is saying the role root does not exist, because by default it does not create a role called root. So if we want to access this Postgres database, we need to access via Postgres user. So for that, let us use the operating system user Postgres. Let me log in with Postgres operating system user now. Now we have logged in with Postgres user, so we can verify the ID. So now we can execute PSQL commands because we have corresponding role Postgres in the PostgreSQL server. So let us execute PSQL now. So we can see that the session is connected and the database is Postgres. This indicates the default database Postgres. So to come out of this session, we can use -q. We can also exit the user session using exit command. So now again we are with root user. We can also access the Postgres database with a single command. So here we can directly provide PSQL command. Now we had a session with Postgres database using Postgres user. So let us quit this session. For example, if you have a test application, if you need to create a test database and we want to connect to the test database using test user. So for that, let us create a test database and a test user. So let us connect to the PostgreSQL session again. Here let us create a database called testdb. Now the database is created successfully. So now let us create a test user. So when we create a user, it will create a role for that user. So now we have created a test database and a test user. Let us try to connect to this test database using this test user. So let us quit this session. We have created the test database and test user role inside the database server. So let us try to use the test user role to connect to the test database. So for that, we'll execute PSQL command again. So we need to mention the database. Let me specify the test user. So to execute this command, let us use the Postgres operating system user. So it is saying the peer authentication failed for user test user. We have different types of authentication like peer authentication for local connections and authentication using MD5 for remote connections and so on. So here for peer authentication, so when we use the user test user, it expects an operating system user with similar name. So but we have not created test user. So let us try to use test user as an operating system user. So it is saying unknown user. So because we have not created this operating system test user. So let us create that. So now the test user is created in operating system. Let us execute the same command again. Now we can see that the test user is able to connect to the test database. Now the test user can execute the database commands. Let us try to execute some SQL commands here. So this is a sample table A. It contains column 1. Here the type is varchar. So the table is created now. So we can insert some data also here. So the data is inserted here and we can query the table as well. So this way, once the database session is started, the user can execute the database SQL commands. So let us quit this session. We have created a database in the database server and also we have seen how to connect to the database within the same server. Now let us see how to connect to this database using the database client in another VM. For that, we need to enable the remote connections in the database server and then the client can connect to the database in the database server. Let us see that now. We have installed the PostgreSQL server in the server VM. Similarly, we can install the PostgreSQL client in the client VM. This is a client virtual machine. We can verify the version of the operating system. So this is also CentOS 7. So now we can execute the same command as in server to install the RPM file. The RPM is installed. That means this repo is added to the yum repos. Now let us execute yum update command. yum update is completed. Now we can search for the client package using yum list command. Here we can see multiple versions of PostgreSQL packages. Out of this we are installing with version 14. This is the server package and this is the client package. We can directly install the client package. We do not need to install server in the client machine. So let us install this package. The client package is successfully installed now. So in this database client VM, we have already installed the PostgreSQL client so that we can execute PSQL commands here. Now we will try to connect to the test DB in the database server from this client VM. So as of now, we have not enabled any remote connections in the database server, but we will try to connect to the test DB in the server from this VM. So let us execute PSQL here. Here we need to provide the IP address of the server. This is the IP address of the server. Here we need to specify the user. So for the user, we are specifying the test user role which we created in the database. And we need to specify the database name. Let us execute this command. So it is saying that the connection to the server on port 5432 failed and the connection is refused. This is because we have not enabled any remote connections in the database server. So let us go to the database server and enable remote connections. So in the server we have some configuration files. Here we have data directory. So in this directory we have some files. So here we have some configuration file postgresql.conf and pg_hbaconf. So these are the two files we will use for configuration mainly. So let us try to open this postgresql conf file. Here we have one listen addresses parameter. So this contains a comma separated IP addresses. So by default this is localhost, which allows only localhost connections. We can make it star for enabling remote connections as well. And also this port needs to be uncommented. So these are the two parameters required for enabling remote connections. So let us save this file. Here we have one more file to configure, pg_hba.conf. Let us open this file. So this file is a PostgreSQL client authentication configuration file. That means how the clients are connected to the server will be mentioned in this file. So basically this file controls which hosts are allowed to connect and how the clients are authenticated and what are the usernames they use and which databases they can access. So here we can see that there are different examples like local connections. For local it is local connections. So for remote we'll use host, which indicates it's a TCP IP socket. We can also use other connections like SSL and all, but for this session we'll use host for the remote connections. So for databases we can mention all, which indicates all the databases in the server can be accessed, or we can mention a single database, which is our test DB. For user we'll use the role which we created, which is the test user role. For the address we'll use the IP address range of the clients which can be allowed to access these remote databases. And for method we can see it can be trust, reject, MD5, password. So there are different types of authentication methods. So for this purpose we'll use MD5, which will use the encrypted passwords for connections. So let us add our entry at the end of this file. So here we are using host for remote connections. So this is for database. So here I am mentioning test DB, and for user we are mentioning test user. And this is the IP address range of this entire network where the client and server are there. So I am giving the entire address. We can also mention the IP address of the client machine itself. And finally we are using MD5 here. So let us add this entry at the end of the file. So now let us save this file. So now we have configured both the configuration files to enable remote connections. Let us restart PostgreSQL service. The service is restarted. Let us verify the status. So it is up and running. Now we can verify the connection from the client machine again. So we are executing the same command now. So this time it is asking for the password, but we have not set any password for the test user role in the database server. Now let us press enter without entering any password. So it is saying the connection to the server failed and no passwords applied. So let us set some password for the role in the database server. Now we will connect to the database server with PostgreSQL role, and then we will alter the role test user to have the login password. So we are connected to Postgres database. So let us alter the role here with login password. Here we need to enter the password. So I am giving test123. So the role is altered and we can quit this session. Let us go back to the client and again verify the connection. Here we are not providing any port. By default it will take 5432. If you want to connect to a custom port, we can connect to that by using -p option. So again it is asking for password. Let us provide the password now. So this time we are successfully connected to the test database from the client machine. Once it is connected, it can perform all the SQL operations as earlier. Let us try an example command here. This table A is already created earlier. Now we can see the rows of table A. So let us quit this session. So in this video we have seen how to install and configure PostgreSQL on Centos Linux, and also we have seen how to create and connect to the database. We also have seen how to enable the remote connections, and we have seen how to connect to the database in the remote machine from a client in the different machine. I hope this video is useful. Thanks a lot for watching.